I'm Dr. Hemavati, Senior Lecturer in Department of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery, Sri Rajiv Gandhi College of Dental Science and Hospital, Bangalore. So in today's session, I'll be covering second part of Principles of Surgery. So today I'll be discussing about different types of mucoperiosteal flaps used in oral surgery and also different bone removal techniques with extraoral incisions which are used in maxillofacial surgery. So there are certain basic principles which has to be followed while placing incision during surgery. The first and foremost thing is we have to use a new sterilized BP blade. Pen grasp has to be used for grasping the scalpel. This provides maximum control and tactile sensitivity. And incision has to be made at right angle to the underlying bone. And the scalpel should be moved in single constant firm movement while placing the incision. In this picture, we can appreciate the scalpel is held in pen grasp position. So the advantages of using this grasp is it allows fine short incision to be placed by using muscles of forearm and muscles of hand. So by using fingers motion, which is more accurate for short delicate maneuvers. And also the hand can be stabilized by resting on patient. This improves the precision of fine cutting of tissues. So let's see the principles of flap design in local flaps. Local flaps has to be outlined by a surgical incision. It carries its own blood supply. Local flaps provide surgical access to underlying tissues. This flap can be replaced back to its original position. Local flap can be maintained with sutures which promotes healing. So the uses or its application includes in oral surgical procedures, periodontic procedures and endodontic procedures. So when we don't follow the basic principles of incision during surgery, we will end up with complications like flap necrosis, that is, flap may lose its blood supply, flap dehiscence, flap tearing and injury to local structures. So these complications can be avoided by strictly adhering to the principles of flap design. Let's see some basic principles which has to be followed while placing incision during surgery to prevent flap necrosis. That is basically to maintain blood supply to the flap. So the first principle is the tip should never be wider than the base unless a major artery is present at the base. Second is the length of a flap should be no more than twice the width. In oral cavity, the length should never exceed the width of the flap. Third, when possible, include an axial blood supply in the base. And the fourth principle is the base should not be twisted, stretched or grabbed with instruments that can interrupt or destroy the blood supply feeding and draining the flap. In this picture, we can appreciate basic principles of flap design which has been stated earlier. So letter X in picture A denotes base of the flap and letter Y denotes height of the flap. Preferably, the base of the flap should be double the height of the flap. In picture B, we can see what precautions has to be taken while placing vertical releasing incision to improve accessibility to the underlying structures. So on left side in picture B, we can see that the vertical releasing incision is placed in divergent fashion. So this provides divergent base thereby preserving blood supply to the flap. But on right side, we can see that the releasing incision is placed in convergent fashion. So this provides convergent base which compromise blood supply to the flap. In picture C, we can notice a buttonhole near free edge of a flap. So the blood supply to flap tissue on side of the hole away from flap base is compromised. Let's see the measures which has to be taken to prevent flap dehiscence. So dehiscence is nothing but separation. So this can be avoided by approximating the edges over healthy bone, handling the tissues edges gently and minimizing tension while placing sutures. So dehiscence exposes underlying bone leading to pain, bone loss, infection and scarring in patients. So what steps can be undertaken to prevent flap tearing includes, we have to make incisions long enough to give adequate access and make more than one releasing incision if more access is needed. So this prevents flap tearing while retracting the flap to access the underlying tissues. In this picture, we can see three types of properly designed oral soft tissue flaps. In picture A, horizontal incision is accompanied by single vertical incision, which is referred as two-sided flap. In picture B, horizontal incision is accompanied by two releasing incision, which is referred as three-sided flap. And in picture C, single horizontal incision is used to create single-sided flap or envelope flap. Let's see what measures has to be followed while handling tissues during surgery. Apart from careful flap design and incision technique, the careful handling of tissues is also very much essential for optimal and uncomplicated healing. So we have to avoid excessive crushing, pulling, extremes of temperature, desiccation and harsh chemicals which can damage the tissues. And tooth forceps and skin hooks are always preferred rather than holding the skin edges with forceps to avoid crushing of the wound edges. Other factors which has to be considered while handling tissue includes, avoid excessive pulling forces to retract tissue. Use copious irrigation when drilling or cutting bone to decrease bone damage from heat. Protect soft tissue when drilling from frictional heat and direct trauma. Wound should never be allowed to desiccate. Only physiologic substances should come in contact with living tissue. To summarize basic principles of flap design and incision, incisions are made in one single stroke as extensions. Cut the soft tissues at right angles to the surface of underlying bone. Flap should be made large enough to provide for visibility, accessibility and adequate room for instrumentation. The vertical releasing incision should be avoided if horizontal incision provides adequate access. This is because the vertical releasing incision can cut or reduce blood supply to the flap and cause added discomfort. The vertical releasing incision, if needed, should be made at a line angle to maintain integrity of the interdental papilla. Let's see which are the various sites where vertical releasing incision can be placed. First is the transverse incision in palate, lingual incision of the mandible, at the canine eminence and also between lower premolars. So the last principle of flap design include injury to local structures. That is, in mandible, Precautions has to be taken while placing incision and reflecting the flap to avoid damage to lingual nerve and mental nerve branches. Similarly, in maxilla, precautions has to be taken to avoid injury to greater palatine artery and nasopalatine nerve and arterial branches. So this table summarizes flap design considerations which has to be avoided to reduce the complications associated with it. So first thing is avoid incision over bony prominences to reduce tension, dehiscence and delayed healing. Second is avoid incision through interdental papilla and also over facial aspect of mid crown. So this reduces dehiscence and periodontal defect. And third is avoid incision which is not placed over sound bone to reduce chances of collapse and delayed healing. Avoid vertical incision in an area of mental foramen to avoid injury to the mental nerve. And lingual releasing incision should be avoided in the posterior mandible to avoid injury to the lingual nerve. And vertical releasing incision should be avoided in the posterior palate, which can result in bleeding and also injury to the greater palatine vessels. Let's see what are different types of full thickness mucoperiosteal flaps. Envelope or circular incision, 3-corner flap, that is envelope flap with 1 vertical releasing incision, 4-corner flap with 2 vertical releasing incision, semilunar incision, Y incision and pedicle flap. So the first flap is envelope or circular flap. So the incision design is, it has to be placed 2 teeth anterior and 1 teeth posterior from affected teeth, which has to be removed. On edentulous ridge, the incision can be placed over crest of the ridge. So this flap can be utilized in conditions like removal of mandibular torus. So the second one is 3-cornered flap, where the horizontal incision is accompanied by single vertical releasing incision. Here the incision extends from 1 teeth anterior and 1 teeth posterior to the affected tooth, and this type of flap provides greater access in apical direction, especially in the posterior aspect of the mouth. So third is 4-corner flap, in which horizontal incision is accompanied by 2 vertical releasing incision forming quadrangular flap. Here the incision runs 1 teeth anterior and 1 teeth posterior to the affected tooth. So next is semilunar incision, which is placed at apex of the tooth. It is basically used to approach the root apex. It avoids trauma to the papilla and gingival margin. It is mainly indicated for periapical surgeries, that is apicectomy procedures involving the periapical region. Here the incision should not cross major prominences, example canine eminence. In this picture we can appreciate Y-shaped incision, which is basically used for removal of maxillary palatal torus. Here we can see a pedicle flap. Pedicle flap is a type of flap which remains attached at its base with adequate blood supply. So this flap mobilizes from one area and then rotates to fill a soft tissue defect in another area. It is mainly indicated for closure of oroantral communications. Now let's see the bone removal technique. Basically there are 2 types of bone removal technique. First is burr technique, that is by using handpiece, and the second one is chisel and mallet technique. Under burr technique, there are four methods. First is postage stamp method, Moore and Gilbey's technique, which is most commonly followed for removal of impacted teeth, guttering technique, and Bowdler-Henry's technique or lateral trephination technique. Chisel and mallet includes window technique, lingual split technique, shaving technique, and distal lingual split technique. Let's see the aims of bone removal technique. So, why do we need to remove the bone? First is to expose the crown by removing the bone overlying it, and secondly to remove the bone obstructing the pathway for removal of the impacted tooth. And as I've already mentioned, there are two types of bone removal technique. One is by burr technique and the other is by chisel and mallet technique. In burr technique, the bone is removed in layers by consecutive sweeping action of burr. And in chisel and mallet technique, the bone is removed in sections by using chisel or by placing osteotomy cut into the bone. So, how much bone has to be removed? Bone should be removed till we reach below the height of contour where we can apply the elevator to luxate the teeth. And also, extensive bone removal can be minimized by sectioning the tooth. Now let's see the advantages and disadvantages of each technique, that is burr and chisel and mallet technique. When we look into the technique, burr technique is easy to perform compared to chisel and mallet technique, which is difficult to perform. So when we look into the control over bone cutting, it is controlled in burr technique, whereas it is uncontrolled in chisel and mallet technique. Patient acceptance will be well tolerated under local anesthesia, but in chisel and mallet technique is not tolerated by patients under local anesthesia. Healing of bone is delayed in burr technique because of heat generated, which destroys the osteogenic cells, but in chisel and mallet technique the healing capacity of bone is good. Postoperative edema is more in burr technique, whereas it is less in chisel and mallet technique. And also the chances of dry socket formation is more in burr technique compared to chisel and mallet technique. The postoperative infection is also more in burr technique, which is less in chisel and mallet technique. So let's see the details of burr technique. Burr technique, it is the preferred method to use a handpiece with adequate speed and high torque to remove the overlying bone. So ideal length is 7 mm and diameter is 1.5 mm. Large rosehead burr of size number 12 or Fisher burr of size number 7 is used for gross bone removal. The burr should rotate in correct direction and at maximum speed. Cutting instruments that induce air should not be used in the procedure. Handpiece should not rest on tissues of the cheeks and lips to avoid burning, as it will be generated during the procedure. And the bone is removed mesially to create a point of application. Buccally by cutting a trough or gutter around the tooth to the root furcation, and distolingually precaution should be taken so that the lingual plate is not breached to protect the lingual nerve. Copious amount of saline irrigation is irrigated to avoid thermal necrosis of bone, and to keep the operator field clean and efficient suctioning has to be done. In the mesial side, adequate bone must be removed so that elevator stands at an angle of 45 degree to the mandible without any support. So let's see the details of irrigation technique. Irrigation has to be carried out at a rate of 15 ml per minute for intermittent drip and 24 ml per minute for continuous flow. A large plastic syringe with blunt and angled 18 gauge needle is used. So solutions used for irrigation include saline, sterile water, Ringer's lactate fluid or 1% povidone iodine solution. Advantages of irrigation include irrigation cools the burr, prevents bone damaging heat buildup, increases the efficiency of the burr. The technical details of chisel and mallet technique include: the mandible should be adequately supported. The mallet is used with loose free swinging wrist motion which gives maximum speed to head of the mallet without introducing the weight of the arm or body into the blow. To plane bone with a chisel, the bevel have to be turned towards the bone, and to penetrate the bone, turn the bevel away from the bone. To restrict the bony cut to the desired extent, a vertical limiting cut is made by placing a 3 mm or 5 mm chisel vertically at the distal aspect of the second molar with bevel facing posteriorly. So it approximates height is 5 to 6 mm. Then chisel is placed at an angle of 45 degree at the lower edge of the limiting cut in an oblique direction. So this will result in removal of a triangular piece of buccal plate distal to the second molar. If necessary, bony cut can be enlarged to uncover the impacted tooth to the desired level. Finally, distal bone must be removed so that when tooth is elevated, there is no obstruction at the distobuccal aspect. So the details of buccal guttering technique include: once the soft tissue is elevated and retracted, the surgeon must make a judgment concerning the amount of bone to be removed. Bone must be removed in an atraumatic, aseptic and non-heat producing technique with as little bone removed and damaged as possible. The amount of bone that must be removed varies with the depth of impaction, morphology of roots and angulation of tooth. The speed of micromotor should be 12,000 to 20,000 rpm, and the ideal length of burr used is 7 mm and diameter of 1.5 mm. Let's see the steps involved in removal of overlying bone. A large round burr number 8 is desirable because it is an end cutting burr and can be effectively used for drilling with a pushing motion. The tip of a Fisher burr number 703 does not cut well, but the edge rapidly removes bone and quickly sections the teeth when used in lateral direction. The bone on the occlusal aspect of the tooth is removed first to expose the crown of the tooth. Then the cortical bone on the buccal aspect of the tooth is removed down to the cervical line. In this picture, we can appreciate that rose head burr is used to remove the bone covering the impacted crown of the tooth. The technical details of postage stamp method involves in this technique. You can appreciate in a picture that a row of small holes is made at 2 to 3 mm equidistance with a small burr, and then they are joined together either with burr or chisel cuts to remove the bone. So the second technique is Moore and Gilbey's collar technique. This is the most commonly followed technique for removal of impacted tooth. It is conventional technique of using burr. Rosehead round burr number 3 is used to create a gutter along the buccal side and distal aspect of tooth. A point of elevation, that is mesial purchase point, is created with burr. and amount of bone sacrificed is also less with this technique. This can also be used in old patient and it is also convenient for all patients. The surgeon should apply a handpiece load of approximately 300 grams and an irrigation rate of 15 ml per minute to 24 ml per minute. For two sectioning, a handpiece load of 300 to 550 grams can be used, and the pressure applied for normal restorative dentistry is 100 to 150 grams. Lateral trepanation technique or Bödler-Henry technique. It is mainly indicated to remove any partially formed unerupted third molar that has not breached the overlying hard and soft tissues. It is usually carried out in age group of 9 to 18 years. The procedure can be done under GA or local anesthesia with sedation. Advantages being excellent periodontal ligament healing on distal surface of second molar, and the second advantage is bone healing is excellent as there is no loss of alveolar bone around second molar. The disadvantage include increased buccal swelling associated with this technique. So in this picture we can appreciate the steps involved in lateral trepanation technique. Here we can see that crown of tooth is completely impacted within the bone. So the steps involve: after reflection of full thickness mucoperiosteal flap, underlying bone is exposed. So once bone is exposed, small burr holes are created similar to postage stamp method, and the lateral cortical plate is removed by using chisel and mallet. So once the crown portion of the tooth is exposed, tooth sectioning is done by using rose head burr and tooth is removed out of the socket. So the steps involved in chisel technique through buccal approach includes: after elevation of full thickness mucoperiosteal flap, vertical limiting cut of 5 to 6 mm is placed with oblique cut of 45-degree angulation. This results in removal of triangular plate of bone. Once this plate of bone is removed, this results in point of application of elevator. So care should be taken not to fracture distolingual bone parallel to internal oblique ridge to reduce the risk of fracture extending up to the coronoid process. Now let's see brief details about lingual split technique. Lingual split technique is described by Sir William Kelsey Fry in 1933, later popularized by Terence G. Ward in 1956, specially for lingually placed teeth. It was modified by Dr. Davis and Lewis in 1960. So what is the surgical basis of lingual split technique? Whenever tooth is extracted, lingual cortical plate is resorbed. Here we can see after placing modified Ward's incision, full thickness mucoperiosteal flap is reflected, which exposes underlying bone. So once bone is exposed, horizontal cut is placed to remove buccal cortical plate. Then chisel is used to section lingual bone or lingual cortex by placing it at an angulation of 45 degree to outer edge, and cutting edge should be parallel to external oblique ridge. Once distolingual bone is removed, it exposes the impacted crown of tooth. Then third molar is elevated from mesial aspect and sutures are placed. Now let's see the modifications of lingual split technique for removal of mandibular third molars. As per Dr. Davis in 1979, The modification involves not to separate the mucoperiosteum from lingual area of bone, and as per Kamanishi modification, don't raise the lingual flap, advance to the lingual side under the bone only to the extent which is necessary. As per Lewis modification, flap was made lingual to second molar instead of third molar, and vertical lingual step cut is placed just distal to second molar. So lingual plate was hinged like an osteoplastic flap. So it is considered as combination of both lingual and buccal approach. Let's see the differences between buccal and lingual approach. So accessibility will be easy in conscious patient in buccal approach, whereas it is difficult in conscious patient in lingual approach. Instruments used in buccal approach includes chisel and mallet or burr and handpiece, but in lingual approach only chisel and mallet can be used. Procedure is very tedious in buccal approach and it's easy in lingual approach. Operating time will be more in buccal approach, whereas it is less time in lingual approach. Technically, buccal approach is easy compared to difficult lingual technique. When we look into bone removal, there is a presence of thick buccal plate in buccal approach compared to thin lingual plate. Post-operative pain will be less in buccal approach, whereas in lingual approach it is more due to damage of lingual periosteum, and post-operative edema is also more in buccal approach compared to lingual approach. Incidence of dry socket will be high in buccal approach due to damage to external oblique ridge, whereas it is negligible in lingual approach as socket is eliminated. Let's see now what are the different extraoral incisions used in oral and maxillofacial surgeries. Before seeing extraoral incision, let's have some brief idea about Langerhans lines. This Langerhans line corresponds to natural orientation of collagen fibers in the dermis and are generally parallel to the orientation of the underlying muscle fibers. So, when incisions are made parallel to Langerhans lines, it will heal better and produce less scarring than those that cut across the Langerhans lines. Let's see general principles of approaches and placing incisions. Use of natural lines. Hiding the scar in hair bearing area inside the hairline. Course of major vessels and important nerves with their branches should be considered in order to prevent any injury. Adequate accessibility depends on length of the incision, so the length of the incision has to be made adequate, and also use of Z-plasty. So what are the different extraoral approaches available for surgery? So it includes preauricular approach, endoral approach, post-auricular approach, submandibular approach, intraoral approach, closed condylotomy approach, rhytidectomy incisions, and also through soft tissue lacerations and scars can be used as extraoral approach for surgeries. First is preauricular incision. This incision was given by Risdon in 1934. Preauricular incision is made along the natural crease anterior to the tragus. Let's see the details of incision. Incision is outlined at the junction of facial skin and helix of the ear. Incision usually is 3 to 4 centimeter in length, consists of two limbs, superior curved limb and inferior vertical limb anterior to tragus. So initial incision is made through skin and subcutaneous tissues, followed by dissection along the external auditory canal to avoid damage to the auricular temporal nerve and superficial temporal artery. Once temporal fascia is reached, it is incised in oblique direction about 2 cm above zygomatic arch. Expose the zygomatic arch and incise the periosteum. Then it is reflected laterally to expose the condylar neck or the articular capsule. So in 1979, first modified preauricular incision was given by Alcayath and Bramley. Let's see the details of Alcayath and Bramley incision. It is basically a question mark shaped incision, that is, skin incision is question mark shaped, begins anterosuperiorly within the hairline and curves backwards and downwards well posterior until it meets upper ear attachment. Incision then follows ear attachment endorally. So what are the other modifications of preauricular incision is Blair's inverted hockey stick incision, Dingman's incision, endoral incision, Popwich and Crane incision, Thomas angulated incision. So incision details of Dingman's modification include incision is started in the fold at the junction of anterior margin of helix, carried downwards to upper portion of the tragus, where it is contained inside the margin of tragus to anterior fold of lobule. It again becomes visible at this point and is carried downwards to lower attachment of ear. So indications of this incision is when we need a maximum exposure and also in lateral and anterior exposure is desired, especially in TMJ ankylosis cases, condylar procedures, a preauricular incision is preferred. Advantages of this incision is minimal bleeding and less sensory loss as it spares main branches of vessels and nerves. Facial planes are easily identified, excellent visibility. Potential complications like muscle herniation and fibrosis are avoided as muscle is not exposed. Disadvantages include presence of scar, threat of damage to facial nerve branches, sensory loss over post-auricular skin, chances of Fraze syndrome. Fraze syndrome is a post-operative phenomenon resulting from salivary gland surgeries. It is manifested as gustatory sweating and flushing. Since the term is coined by Lucy Frey, it is referred as Fraze syndrome. And other disadvantages, chances of damage to superficial temporal artery. Next is endoral approach, first described by Lampart as an approach to mastoid process for surgical improvement of otosclerosis for approaching TMJ. Technical details of endoral incision includes incision begins well within the external acoustic meatus at superior meatal wall. This incision is carried carefully through the skin over the tragal cartilage at a 90-degree angulation to the most convex part of the tragus itself. The incision is carried superiorly to the uppermost portion of the auricle and then extends in approximately 45-degree angulation into the temporal hairline for about 3 to 4 centimeter. Indications of this incision include when lateral and posterior exposure is required and also when we need to avoid scarring. Advantages are excellent lateral and posterior exposure. Scar exposure is less. Disadvantages include limited anterior visibility, demands greater skills, and tragal cartilage degeneration. Post-auricular approach, introduced by Bockenheimer in 1920, modified by Axelson. So indications of this incision is lateral and posterior exposure when it is required, aesthetic purpose, healthy ear apparatus and absence of oral sepsis, normal width of external auditory canal, absence of infection or inflammation in joint structures. General health of patient does not restrict length of operating period. Advantages of this incision include predictability of anatomic exposure, excellent surgical exposure of the bilaminar zone and the mandibular condyle posteriorly, cosmetic superiority, low risk of seventh cranial nerve injury, dissection is more rapid. Disadvantages being not advised in patients susceptible to keloid formation, presence of infection, meatal stenosis can occur, and anterior exposure is limited with this approach. So next is residence approach or submandibular approach, in which incision about finger breadth is placed below the angle of mandible parallel to the lower border of mandible. This incision lies between cervical branches of facial nerve, lower boundary of bony external acoustic meatus, at least 3 cm inferior to it. Indications of this approach for subcondylar fractures, severe bony ankylosis, direct condylar fracture fixation, costochondral grafting. And the advantages include less chance of facial nerve damage. Disadvantages are inadequate accessibility, increased reflection and tract of tissue. Temporary paresthesia may be present very rarely. Retromandibular approach or Hintz approach. It exposes the entire ramus from behind the posterior border. Therefore, this approach may be useful for procedures involving the area on or near the condylar neck or head or ramus itself. Indications of this approach include in condylar neck fractures, condylotomy, vertical ramus osteotomies. Advantages are less damage to facial nerve. Disadvantages include reduced accessibility, paresthesia of facial nerve and damage to retromandibular vessels. Rhytidectomy approach, which is nothing but facelift approach. It's a variant of retromandibular approach. So indications of this approach include for aesthetic purpose and when extensive exposure is required. Advantages being less conspicuous facial nerve and good exposure can be achieved. Disadvantages are added time is required with this approach. Last approach is coronal approach or bicoronal or hemicoronal or bitemporal approach. So this is a versatile surgical approach to the upper and middle regions of the facial skeleton, including the zygomatic arch and temporomandibular joint. Major advantage of this approach is most of the surgical scar will be hidden within the hairline. This incision following hairline about 4 cm behind it. Depth will be up to subgaleal loose tissue. Inferior extent continues as preauricular incision. Blunt dissection is done to reflect the flap till 2 cm above the infraorbital rim and superior temporal line. Pericranium is incised about 3 to 4 cm superior to orbital rim. Incision of Alcaith Bramley may be continued with this approach. Indications of this approach is when bilateral exposure is needed or when extensive exposure is required for procedures. Advantages are good exposure, easy to get facial face, reduced risk of damage to facial nerve branches, hidden scar. The disadvantages being bleeding in initial phase, that is during incision and flap reflection phase. Extensive dissection is required, not aesthetic in completely bald patients. Thank you.